Welcome to Leadership Luminaries Lounge with Kerry and Peggy O'Neal, a podcast about the connection of leadership, philosophy, practice, and impact on society. Get ready to be illuminated.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Friday, July the 19th, and today Peggy and I are going to have a conversation regarding anti-fragility. And just going to take a minute and fortunately or unfortunately, you get to witness me pontificating for a moment as we open up. Poor Peggy, she has to listen to it as I go on and on.
I love listening to you, Kerry.
Yeah, but it is really interesting in the past few weeks in the United States. We've really had some interesting times that really pointed out the fragility of a lot of systems that we had taken for granted. Starting out last Saturday, one of the things, and we have a history in this country, unfortunately, of political assassinations. But it had been such a long time that we had forgotten the fragility of individuals out in the open speaking to crowds. And so one of the presidential candidates was survived a attempted assassination, which was quite phenomenal because a lot of the times those events target is unfortunately demised and dies. Then we looked at the other political party that was dealing with what they thought was going to be a smooth transition into the campaign season. But the leader of that party, the president of the United States, ended up having a very bad experience. And so now the stability of that political party and even the stability of the election is in question and remains in question even today. Going to today, we were just talking about last night, we went to sleep thinking no thoughts about anything abnormal, thinking about going about our normally daily activities, but woke up this morning to understand that multiple airlines had been grounded and that the Microsoft platform had been inaccessible to millions of their customers around the world. And that ended up cascading into the failures or the inabilities of 911 emergency systems, banking operations globally, point of sale equipment, all sorts of things failed because of what was originally thought might be a cybersecurity incident turned out to be a incident based on the fragility that was induced into the system by a vendor that many of our leading companies had allowed this software to be embedded into their Microsoft product, whether they knew it or not, and ended up embedding a fragility that as a system change was pushed out, it brought basically Windows systems in multiples of operating environments around the world to their knees. And all of a sudden, we realized how fragile many of our systems were because of that. It was kind of funny. One of the major networks, I'm kind of a little bit of a news junkie, that their anchor personnel, they normally have laptops and other things sitting on the anchor desk, and they had a pad and yellow pads and pencils, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But it really points out the fact of how fragile we actually have become, and possibly even more fragile as we have become more capable. More things are capable of being done. And so Peggy and I, in preparing for this conversation, we talked a bit about this fragility in the world and wanted to spend a minute talking about that. It is a responsibility of leadership to assess the risk and the fragility of their environments and their systems and to do whatever they can about that. And so, Peggy, I don't know if you had any opening pontifications that you like to share too about the fragility.
I'll pontificate on your pontification. Some things that came to me though as I was hearing you is I think part of it is the the fragility is that we think of all these things as separate, like this party, this person, this party, this person, um, whatever, the systems will take care of themselves, that sort of thing. And instead of realizing, oh wait, I'm part of this whole system. I'm not separate from either of these candidates. I'm not separate from all the equipment that I use. I mean, yes, it can seem like, of course, physical separation and so on, but that as far as my ability to be resilient, my ability to move in the world is impacted by all of these occurrences, that we're all influencing and being influenced by everything all the time, whether we recognize it or not. I've talked about it before, that we're like all one big stew. You know, you add a new carrot, it's going to change the flavor some. And so that everything that's going on in our lives, but also all these other systems, everything's influencing everything. There's no compartmental this, compartmental that. And even with and listening to you, even with these candidates, I realized as you were speaking, oh, I even kind of felt like they were separate events and hadn't really realized but that did impact me personally. I knew it did, the fear, the concern, and so on, but somehow I even had a bit of a disconnection, even though I knew we were having this talk, and we talk about this all the time, how we're interconnected. So we're, as you're saying, as leaders, and whether we mean leaders of organizations, of course, leaders of organizations, but then families, communities, and then our own lives, that to be to support us in being less fragile or more resilient or more capable of moving forward in our lives, that we regularly think about all these things, things that could happen, things that might happen, and am I really paying attention to everything? Not everything, we can't pay attention to everything, but to some extent paying attention to as much as we can that's going on in the whole world, and not just in my little organization or my little community, but starting to expand our sense of reach and influence both ways. You know, it's influencing me and how I'm influencing. So those thoughts came to me.
You know, we've talked about it before, but one of the authors that I've read and spent some time looking at more of his work is Nassim Taleb. And Nassim was most notably recognized as the author of the book The Black Swan. And the whole premise of that concept is that it has started a whole thinking concept called the Black Swan event, where basically it is an event that comes out of some supposedly nowhere, that is totally unforeseen, that has a profound impact on you, that you had not even accounted for. And just as kind of one of the things that that it was named for was that originally it was thought that swans only existed in white, that their feathers only were white. But as it turns out, that there are swans that have black feathers. They're rare. They occur in different places. But what really pointed out was the fact that people thought that this was the whole, that swans only came in white feathers, was a failure of imagination and a failure of thinking on those people that were looking at the circumstances. And then after they discovered black swans, then they said, of course there could be black swans. I mean, they're birds. Birds have different colored feathers. They may eat different things. They have different genetics, even though they have the same genetic family. They have different individual genetics that may cause variations like that. So it shouldn't be unthought of that you may come up with a black swan. And so one of the things that he also points out is that we live in fragile worlds because of a lack of an imagination of the leadership. in that we build these profoundly fragile systems that are based on the thought and the irrational hope that nothing out of the ordinary will happen, that everything will always operate the way that we thought of it operating at the best of times right now. Any
Oh, well, I love what you're saying about failure of imagination, because I do think I think that's huge, this failure of imagination. My imagination over the last year or two has really been, I go, well, I could imagine that. And I mean, now in retrospect, sorry, what I'm trying to say is that after events happen and they say, well, that's a failure of imagination, they didn't notice that or think of that or whatever, then I've started actually engaging my imagination more into the, well, what if, and then, so that could be a good practice for somebody. Well, yeah, what else could happen or what else might happen? And not in a negative way. I mean, sometimes the imagination is imagining the worst, which that's useful. We do want to imagine the worst. Why? So we're prepared for it, as you're saying, so we're not so fragile, that we can feel strong, that we've thought about the worst, we prepared for the worst. And when we do that, we're ready for more things, but also to prepare for the potential, the positive, if you will, potential, because the same thing happens in reverse. Yeah, there could be some things that are horrible circumstances or great circumstances, either one, that depending on the type of business an entrepreneur is in or a business is in, all kinds of new possibilities could be available, but somebody else will get them first, or you'll miss out, or won't even be able to address it because that wasn't thought of ahead of time. But yeah, imagination is key in this, to prepare for just be prepared for life. Oh, and the other thing though, because lots of people, so many people these days go, well, how do I know what's going to happen next? Well, yeah, we don't know, so we can't prepare exactly for what would happen, but it's in that act of thinking about what could happen that then we're prepared for things that we don't imagine right now.
Yeah. One of the things that he pointed out in one of his other works, and it's backed up by nature, is that while we don't know what will happen in the future and when it might occur, we do know about what we need to survive and
Mm,
what we need to thrive. And so therefore we need to take advantage of doing those things. And I was thinking about, I come from kind of a, conservative background, and I like to talk about the difference between humans and the what we call the lower forms of animals and that sort of thing. But if you look at nature and the lower forms of animals, you realize that they actually are doing something instinctively to be
yeah.
able to manage the fragility of their environment. Um, my wife has turned our backyard in kind of like a little nature oasis there. And so
Oh,
we see lots of
nice,
birds,
Terry.
squirrels, and
Well,
chipmunks and all the sorts of things. But when you're looking at that, looking at the chipmunks and the squirrels, you begin to see that they are doing instinctively some things to deal with the fragility of their environment. They find and hide and store food for the winter because they know that they need food to survive every day. And so while food is plentiful today, they understand that and they eat what they're willing to eat today, but they also take some and hide it for tomorrow because they understand that I need to eat tomorrow. And if something happens to this food supply, I need to be able to survive. The other thing that you see is that we really like to have hummingbirds come around, and she puts up hummingbird feeders and so but hummers and other birds have migratory instincts. And so they understand that fragility of winter means that they have to pay attention to the seasons. And so they move according to the seasonal changes. Maybe they track the sun. I think that's what the latest theory is, that they're looking at the angles of the sun and lights, whatever, and that's how they know to migrate. But they know how to move when the time comes so that they have the best chance of survival. You know, I believe that many of us have a sense also of when things are likely to be unstable. But you know, it's not just the instinctive things. That's what hedge funds are all about. Hedge funds count on, and that's one of the things that Nassim talks about. He actually comes from the market trading world, that hedge funds count on things being the opposite of what they currently are.
Oh, is that right?
And so they build investment portfolios such that they're balanced, such that they take advantage of the opportunities as they exist today, but then they're hedged and plan on that there's going to be a change in the market conditions for tomorrow. And so when those changes come, they are already prepared with investments that will kick in and provide the best returns on the stored assets to take advantage of the fragility that others are experiencing. And so while people, you know, like market crashes and those kind of things and the recoveries of that, those are being resilient. And like today, you know, they're talking about the resilient recovery from the Windows outages, infrastructure outages. But what would it take to build a system such that you're capable of being able to deliver whenever things are happening? What if you had an airline today that flew when the other airlines, the major carriers, were grounded around the world? Not because that the airlines, you know, the air stopped working or the airplane stopped working. It was their infrastructure that they had built in, the built-in fragility of their systems put them out of business for a while. Imagine being able to have the capacity to take on those other passengers and sell the tickets for what you want to. People Friday and people want to go home.
Or they could, yes. I mean, they could do that, or they could be, yeah.
I mean, they obviously you don't, you know,
They don't have to go around scalping people.
Yeah,
They
you don't
could
want to scalp people,
no.
but there is a market.
Yeah, but there would be a premium market. Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate you bringing up the animals and their instincts, because I think, like you said too, that we do have the same instincts, but that we've been so conditioned out of them, so trained out of them, that we use our rational mind even for the kind of possibilities we're talking about today, and which there's a place for that. Yeah, rationally think through what else could happen, but then bring in the intuitive sensing, the imagination element into it. And that, for a lot of people, takes some they have to learn something new about themselves, some new and light up some capacities that have been dormant, because so many people just use their intellect and information, I mean, normal, like reading or something like that, instead of, well, what do I sense about the future? What do I sense about my industry? And that takes being still, being quiet, asking questions regularly, and not letting the mind answer the questions, but seeing what sort of things come to them, arise. And so I think that's a big element here to what we're speaking about too, is to help us all re-engage, re-enhance those natural abilities that most of us have educated ourselves out of.
You know, you bring up a really good point. It's pretty easy to talk about the fears and the dangers of being in a fragile world, and being susceptible to the effects of change when you're expecting things to remain the same. But what do leaders do at a individual level, at a organizational level, and at a societal level? What is it that leaders, individuals, I mean, us as individuals, leaders of ourselves and our families and our households, us as leaders of organizations, and then those of us that are called on to be leaders in society, what is it that we do? And I think one of the first things that you pointed out is imagine that it's
Mhm.
possible for things to be different.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
One of the issues that we talked about is that lack of imagination. And when I'm dealing with transformation in major organizations or transformation in period, one of the things that Bob Miles pointed out in his work with the accelerated corporate transformation model that he worked with, and I'd learned and adopted and adapted for government, is that you really have to confront reality.
Mhm.
You mentioned quiet time. You
Mhm.
need to really assess who you are,
Mhm.
who your organization is, what you can and can't do, what you want to do, and what's the world around you like? What's the environment like? Any
Mhm.
thoughts on that, Peggy, that you might want to share, and that being able to leaders ground themselves in reality?
Yeah, yeah. So some next things, what to do,
Yes.
correct things to do. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
why don't you share a little bit of some work and some writing that you've done on that already?
yeah. So I did write an article about this. Um, and so there's some specific things that can be useful. So if you want to take notes right now, this would be a good time to do that. So to ask some questions of yourself, like, how will I be present and current in the world and in my profession? So, like what we've been talking about, what Kerry brought up about imagination and about intuition that the animals have, that's part of this. How am I going to be current in the world and in my profession besides just intellectually? So, how am I going to stay informed? So, that would be one way to be open and be quiet and listen. But then reading, what do you want to read? Are there experts you want to talk to or follow? On social media or elsewhere? Or there's certain networking that you want to do? Or what else? What else comes to you as you sit and ask yourself, how are you going to be present in the world and in your profession and stay informed? And then what changes in the world do you foresee? How will you anticipate and prepare for them? Both the negative things, so that what we call negative that could impact my life and work, but also what are the positive visionary opportunities? And then what potential changes or setbacks do you want to anticipate? Potential challenges or setbacks that you want to anticipate. And then what are possible? So you list those, of course. What are potential changes and setbacks that you want to anticipate? But then what are possible ways to address them? What do you want to do about them? And so you start thinking about what you want to do about them now, what you might do about them when they arise, if they arise. Maybe there's some professional development for you to do. So what will you pursue to stay ahead of trends and cultural trends? I mean, culture too. Okay. And then how will you make sure that you're aware of policy changes? So there's a lot going on in government these days. So,
Mhm.
and a lot of changes around policies and regulations. So, what are you doing to stay involved in your industry, to be aware of what regulatory changes, no matter what kind of industry or business that you're in? And then are you involved in advocacy groups or professional networks so that you know from them what are the developments in your industry and get involved in influencing policy discussions that impact your field? And then do you have a supportive community? So do you have people around you, either in your organization or elsewhere, that are having these sorts of conversations, not you alone? I mean, you can do it alone, but of course, as we all know, we're like exponentially more imaginative, creative, and seeing things when we're with other people and working with other people. So do you have a supportive community? And then if you do, great. But if you don't, okay, what might you want to do about that?
That's why
And are they, huh?
that's why I like chatting with you. You're such a supportive community. You bring out the great ideas in me.
You bet, and vice versa. And then maybe expanding that community as well. And maybe there are some things that you want to do in your community now that you've heard all this that can be more support. You can support each other even more with these sorts of questions. And then as we've been talking about too, or not maybe not as much as we're about to, but how are you going to ensure that you have the emotional capacities necessary for whatever happens? Like Kerry started off by saying we're fragile, and in general we are. And so do you have the emotional capacities for major change, for upheaval, for things falling apart, or things going extraordinarily well. I've worked with plenty of people, but they don't have the emotional capacity to grow how they really want to. So we have to help them expand those muscles, build those muscles for more, better, different, whatever it is that they're wanting, more new arenas, new possibilities, or culture change even. So do you have the emotional capacities for real chaos, destruction? We don't know. We just went through a pandemic, right? So do we have those? And so you've got that to assess against. And then also you have the emotional capacities for huge possibilities and availability for them in the face of if there is some catastrophe, you have the ability to recover quickly, to move forward, and so on. And so those are things Kerry and I both work with people on as well, but because that's key as much as almost anything else on there.
Those concepts that Peggy brought out are almost universal from an individual level to an organizational level and even to a society level. Peggy and I, as we were preparing for this conversation, we chatted last week, and we were talking about democracy, and she had given a synopsis of another article that she had read, where basically those same concepts are what's required for a society to be able to not be fragile and to thrive, and not only survive, but thrive in this world that we have that's ever changing. One of my pet peeves, and I know it's meant to be a political thing and it's thought of as being really cute and smart, is the anti-woke agenda, where basically some political leaders are basically saying is that they are against this woke agenda. Well, they are actually being very accurate about that. They want people to ignore what they see and what they sense around them. And then to not take actions to be able to deal with. And some of the big issues that we need to deal with in society have to do with the fact that we try to be willfully ignorant of that there are all sorts of people that make up us. And so therefore it's incumbent upon us to be aware of the diversity of all of the people that are around us, and not just to protect ourselves from the difference, but to enable ourselves to capitalize on it, which is one of the things that businesses, we had talked about there's a backlash against there's a risk rating called ESG, environmental social governance ratings, where basically the politics have focused on the fact that they don't like the environmental change because they want to deny the possibility of environmental and climate change and the impact of that. And what are the advantages of that? For instance, like, now we produce more renewable energy than we do from non-renewable energy. What if we had actually buried our heads in the sand and had forbidden that capability of being implemented and put online? We talked about the fact that the world is changing demographically. And right now, the people of I like to call it the African diaspora, are pretty much thought of as being a minority, and pretty much in many societies beyond the global South are thought of as being not producive, or somebody that we need to protect ourselves from, or that we need to bring up to speed to bear. But the reality is by 2050, 25% of the global population projection, we're expected to go from 8 billion people to 10 billion people. And we're expecting that 2.5 billion people will be of African descent by the year 2050. And oh, by the way, it's almost 20% of that now. There's about 1.9 of the 8 billion, 1.9 billion, about a billion people of African descent on the African continent right now, and about 900 million throughout the rest of the globe of people of the African diaspora that make up people of African descent. If we choose to not allow us to be capitalized on that, if we choose not to capitalize on it, if we close our eyes to the capability and work against nature to say that we want to ignore or work against 25% of our population, makes no sense. The other thing is governance. Governments around the world are doing things. We go through these periods of global interaction and interchangeability, which we see now that happens automatically. There was no mandate that said that these Microsoft based systems that would cause the fragility of today had to be mandated around the world. That was an economic decision that governments and businesses and individuals made based on what they thought was advantageous at the time. And yet they introduced that fragility into it. So we cannot protect ourselves from the changes in the world. The world will change. That's the only constant. But what we can do is think about what do we need to be successful in our societies, in our businesses, in our homes, our families, and as individuals.
It's beautifully said, Kerry.
Thank you. So, Peggy, as we kind of wrap up our little conversation here on anti-fragility, I would like to come back to this a bit more and maybe invite some more guests to talk about fragility and anti-fragility. And another concept I just wanted to introduce, then give another shout out to one of my other mentors, Dr. Gregory Watson. He's my master black belt, Lean Six Sigma master black belt instructor. And we talked about this concept, and he was saying resiliency is not enough because resiliency is reactionary. That means that you're waiting for something to happen and you're prepared to recover from it. How about not letting bad things happen or being able to benefit from the changes when things do change? That's what anti-fragility is about, and that's the aim that I think that we should have.
Yeah, most definitely.
Peggy, as usual, it's always great having a conversation with you. Thank you for having this tips for our leader community to be able to. I hope you'll be able to take notes. And if you don't have those notes, maybe if you contact Peggy, she'll be
willing the whole article.
Yeah, share the article with you. That'd be great. Well, until next time, let your light shine. Thanks.
Thank you.